Chapter 5. Flowers. Days of travel passed as the slimes and their master pressed onward through snow-choked roads and paths drowned in thawing mud. Grex, the metal-clad monstrosity, lingered behind them, his gaze constantly drifting upward. Winter-bare trees creaked in the wind. Flocks of migrating birds cut across the pale sky, and Grex drank in every sound, their songs, the rhythm of wings, the simple miracle of motion. Each breath he took sent heat through his slime-like body, metal steaming as frost hissed and melted against him. Astegon's eyes never left the road for long. He walked close to Alwyn, subtly adjusting his pace to match the old man's uneven steps. Beneath layers of special garments, cotton-lined and threaded with fine gold, Alwyn coughed, his breath shallow, his bones aching with every mile. When the wind sharpened, Astegon shifted just enough to shield him, becoming a living barrier of ice and purpose. The cold did not touch him, but it punished Alwyn mercilessly. Their destination lay beyond the eastern peaks, the Temple of Sacred Pires, where wizard and paladin alike were to gather. The invitation had come from Pope Justin Forb, Alwyn's old friend, and more importantly, the fragile linchpin holding together the uneasy balance between arcane scholars and faith-bound soldiers. It was only because Justin himself had reached out that Alwyn had agreed to attend at all. A peace treaty was to be discussed, spoken of carefully, like a volatile reagent, between mages and paladins whose history was soaked in suspicion and blood. The journey tested them, but they endured. By nightfall, the trio reached the small frontier town of Haven, its lights glowing softly against the encroaching dark. Just one more day remained before the ascent to the peaks.
"Slime, pay attention," Alwyn snapped. "It's been a long journey."
Grex jolted from his wandering gaze, turning forward at once. A low gargle slipped from him, acknowledgement, not apology, as the trio halted before Haven's wooden garrison wall. The timber barrier ringed the town like a scar, its planks carved and notched with blade marks both ceremonial and real. Along the base of the fence lay beds of dying flowers, their wilted heads pressed into frozen soil, meant to rot and enrich the ground when summer dared return.
"Master, I do not possess the funds to purchase the necessary wares,"
Astegon said, extending a hand expectantly, already calculating what would be needed for the climb. Alwyn shook his head. His gaze drifted instead to the distant peak looming beyond Haven, its summit swallowed by cloud.
"Here."
He tossed Astegon a separate satchel, the soft clink of gold answering the air.
"Purchase what is necessary."
Then he turned to Grex, who had already begun drifting again, this time watching the town's heavy wooden gates. They stood open, welcoming mage and paladin alike, faith-bound armor and arcane robes passing through side by side in an uneasy harmony.
"Slime," Alwyn said flatly. "Make sure Astegon is safe. Accompany him."
"Glug," Grex scoffed, more sound than sentiment, and lumbered after his brother. Astegon offered a brief wave over his shoulder, an almost human gesture, as the two creations entered Haven together. The townsfolk barely spared them a glance, as if monsters wrapped in purpose were easier to ignore than men without it.
"Oh, Grex, I am about to treat you to something that I believe is the most scrumptious thing I've ever consumed on the outside," Astegon said, tossing the satchel of gold into the air and catching it with casual precision. Grex did not reply, but his excitement was obvious. His massive form hummed and shifted, the metal plates of his armor giving off a faint creak as he followed. They moved easily through Haven's streets, soon reaching the marketplace. Mages crowded the stalls, trading coin for curiosities both wondrous and unsettling. Crystals carved into arcane foci, bottled wisps of light, severed limbs preserved in salts and runes, future parts of something that would one day walk. Just beyond the stalls where Grex and Astegon were preparing to shop,
A young man, bold, wide-eyed, and far too curious, strode straight up to the bulking, iron-bound monster. He reached out and tapped the latch on Grex's stomach. The sound that answered was not hollow, but dampened, a soft, muffled clink from somewhere deep within the suit. Grex's biomass stirred at once. Awe rippled through him, followed by something tighter and more dangerous. The sensation reminded him of being watched through glass, of small hands tapping a bowl simply because something lived inside it.
"Glug,"
he signaled Astegon. The brothers shared a look, quiet, immediate suspicion, as the robed novice mage produced a clear shard of crystal and held it up like a magnifying lens, peering closer at the seams of Grex's armor.
"Oh my," the man breathed, grinning wide. "This is obviously Master Alwyn's work."
Astegon stepped between them without hesitation.
"Can I help you, sir?"
The young man barely spared him a glance at all, but when he noticed the white mask and the calm blue glow behind it, he blinked. His smile only widened.
"Oh, apologies, but this thing is unmistakable, isn't it?"
He gestured excitedly toward Grex.
"Master Alwyn's craftsmanship. No one else could—"
"How do you know Master Alwyn?" Astegon interrupted. The question landed flat and cold, cutting through the man's enthusiasm. Astegon ignored the novice's continued gestures toward the armor, his posture shifting subtly. One hand rested on the hilt of his scimitar, a blade hastily forged from Alwyn's discarded scraps, imperfect but sharp. Grex loomed just behind him, silent, his massive form leaning against a fraction. The maul in his grasp, a weapon he had built himself from failed metal and broken intent, hung heavy at his side. The young mage was no real threat. Astegon knew that. But threats did not always announce themselves with strength, and it was always better to be wary than sorry.
"Well," the young man said easily, "he's the leader of the Lostwick Circle, the first to rebel during the Mage Rebellion."
He brushed his curly brown hair aside and tugged his robe straighter, speaking with the casual reverence of someone repeating a legend.
"Sort of everyone's hero."
Astegon's gaze hardened.
"Then how would you know his craft?"
He gestured toward Grex, the motion sharp, dismissive. The young man only smirked.
"Ha! Because I'm an artificer."
Pride crept into his voice as he pointed openly at Grex.
"A young one, sure, but I studied dwarven tinkering, and Alwyn's more creative interpretations."
As if on cue, he flexed his wrist. A copper clock bloomed to life there, intertwining gears turning in perfect rhythm, driven by a magnetic crystal that hummed softly beneath the casing. He tapped a monocle resting over the eye, its lens flashing faint runes as it swept across Grex, then Astegon. Numbers flickered, readings spiked. The energy bleeding off the two creations was low, but unmistakable. Far denser than any paladin the monocle had ever measured. Astegon followed the man's gaze, then exhaled through his nose. Slowly, deliberately, he eased his stance and stepped back half a pace. The suspicion dulled, but did not vanish. The young artificer tilted his head.
"And you,"
he continued, circling Astegon with unconcealed fascination,
"don't have any visible structure, no hinges, no reinforcement lattice, no core housing."
His brow furrowed, intrigued.
"You're not mechanical at all."
Astegon felt a ripple pass through his form, so small even Grex missed it.
"This one," the man said, gesturing to Grex, "is brute ingenuity, metal, containment, force."
Then his eyes returned to Astegon.
"But you don't make sense."
He smiled wider.
"That's Alwyn's mastery. Only he and his son could make things like you."
The words struck Astegon like a chisel tapping glass.
"Are you traveling with him?"
the artificer asked lightly.
"Is he here? Now?"
Astegon didn't answer right away. Behind his mask, something cold settled into place.
"You should not concern yourself with the matters of our master,"
Astegon said coolly. The words came sharper than he intended,
cutting, defensive. And whether or not we travel with him is not something you need to know." The young artificer flinched. He sighed, shoulders slumping, and reached into his satchel. From it, he drew several schematics, old, worn thin at the edges, their ink faded from years of careful study. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. His eyes glazed as he held them out, not in accusation, but in reverence. "I've studied so much of what he's published, his notes, his failures, his theories no one else dared write down." A weak smile tugged at his lips. "I'm just a fan of his work, of his life." He gathered the papers back to his chest. "I won't pry. I'll leave you both to gather what you need before the summit. That's why we're all here, after all." Head bowed, he turned to leave. Before Astegon could respond, metal shifted. Grex extended a massive hand, not threatening, not abrupt, just enough to halt the young man's retreat.
"So," Grex rumbled, his voice low and uncertain, "you're participating too?"
The question surprised even Astegon. The artificer froze, then turned, eyes lighting up. "Of course," he said eagerly. "Every mage and paladin has been summoned, from every corner of Thalos. Not all the figureheads will attend, I'm sure, but—" His grin widened. "It means a great deal that Alwyn will be there, and the gathering's open. Anyone may attend." The joy in his voice was unguarded, earnest. Grex felt something warm coil in his core, an unfamiliar, pleasant sensation. Optimism, maybe, or hope. Astegon studied his brother for a long moment, then the young mage. Slowly, his hand eased away from his blade. "You may walk with us," Astegon said at last. The irritation lingered in his tone, but it no longer carried threat. "If we share the same destination, we may as well not travel as strangers." The artificer blinked, then clicked his heels together in barely contained excitement. "Truly?" Astegon gave a short nod. Grex watched the man's smile bloom, bright and unburdened, and found himself thinking, not for the first time, of warmth and of smiles. "Well, we've got one day of travel left," the young artificer said cheerfully. "Might as well grab a bite and whatever supplies we need."
Glug.
The sound rippled from within Grex's armor, low, private. Astegon felt it more than heard it.
"Brother,"
Grex's voice echoed within their shared cadence.
"This human isn't like our master. Do we kill him?"
Astegon didn't stop walking. "Blub," Astegon responds. "His intentions aren't malicious. He's a bookworm enamored with a fantasy that isn't gonna end the way he wants to." Grex's steps slowed for half a heartbeat, then resumed, satisfied. The three moved deeper into the market, swallowed by noise and motion. Vendors stood atop crates and soapboxes, shouting themselves hoarse, blacksmiths advertising cold-weather steel, alchemists hawking bottled warmth, butchers carving steaming cuts of meat, while paladins and mages alike crowded their stalls. Coin clinked, magic hummed, the air smelled of iron, incense, blood, and spice. "Well then," Astegon said aloud in common, patting the coin pouch at his hip, "let's find that succulent treat I've been carefully absorbing into my memory." Grex's helm tilted slightly.
"You've eaten everything I have," he replied flatly. "I can't imagine it's that exclusive."
Astegon spun on his heel and began walking backward, facing his brother while effortlessly avoiding passers-by. "That's because you've never been outside," he said, voice light with excitement. "Out here, these creatures make things out of nothing. No spell circles, no schematics, just pressure and patience." The young artificer hummed happily as he led them on, unaware of the conversation unfolding behind him. But Grex stopped. Something had caught him. At a small, almost overlooked stand grew a flower unlike any he had seen before. Yet it felt familiar. A red daffodil, small and vivid, its core glowing like trapped sunlight, surrounded by brown kernels arranged in careful symmetry. It resembled a sunflower dipped in fresh paint,
Its vines and leaves were a bright, unnatural green, the entire plant glossy, almost plastic, as though reality itself had struggled to decide what it was meant to be. Without hesitation, Grex lumbered toward the stand and pointed at the flower. An old woman stepped forward from behind the booth. She wore a wide, knowing smile, her gray eyes sharp despite their age. Without a word, she plucked the flower free and offered it to him.
"Eat?"
Grex asked simply. The woman recoiled at once, clutching the flower behind her back as if it had teeth. Astegon, several steps ahead, turned at the sudden silence. Confusion crossed his face as he approached, but the moment the woman saw him, her tension eased, just slightly.
"Apologies," Astegon said smoothly, "but my brother feels he's seen that flower before. Where does it come from?"
As he spoke, thoughts stirred within him, lessons Alwyn had drilled into his mind about the flora of Thalos. Flowers were rare, decorative plants rarer still. Most could not survive without deliberate care, magic, or sacrifice. Yet this one stood here freely.
"Oh, darling," the old woman cooed,
carefully adjusting the pot in her hands.
"This flower is plucked from the highest reaches of our sacred peaks. Purely ornamental, no medicinal properties whatsoever."
Her smile thinned as her gaze slid to Grex's towering frame.
"And it would be quite the insult if someone were to eat it."
"I wouldn't dare," Astegon replied smoothly, extending his hand as the woman placed the potted flower into his cold palm. Frost crept instinctively along the ceramic.
"I see. This bloom appears in our master's notes, a symbol of both the royal family and the church."
He turned to show Grex, and Grex was gone. Astegon stiffened. Across the market, Grex stood transfixed by another stall entirely. A man cloaked in black bartered quietly beside a hulking flesh golem stitched from mismatched limbs. The creature twitched with half-life as the man inspected severed arms and torsos laid out like butchered livestock. Something deep inside Grex pulled him closer, an ache in his core, unfamiliar and heavy. Chapter 6. Curiosity.
"Oh my," the young man said suddenly, drawing Astegon's attention back. "How rude of me. I never introduced myself."
Astegon turned, masking his concern.
"The name's Thavias," the artificer said with an easy grin. "I live just west of here. Suppose I forgot my manners. Only so many people to learn them from."
He chuckled, then glanced toward Grex.
"Still, most adept mages would have immediately recognized you two as constructs."
Astegon said nothing. Thavias stepped closer to Grex, curiosity overriding caution. He tapped the iron plating, then pressed his ear against the armored torso.
"Incredible," he murmured, "but there are no hinges, no resonance joints, which begs the question, what exactly?"
He grabbed one of Grex's smaller auxiliary arms. The reaction was instantaneous. Emerald slime surged through the gaps in Grex's gauntlet, hissing as it spilled outward. The man cried out as his hand blistered and blackened, arcane heat scorching flesh before Grex recoiled.
"Ouch!"
Thavias muttered, rubbing his scorched hand, the sting still fresh. He leaned closer, curiosity undeterred, pressing his face to the seams of Grex's armored torso, peering into every crack and fold.
"He used an ooze as the structural base? But that shouldn't be possible."
"No," Grex's low, guttural warning rumbled from within the iron frame, the tone sharp, protective.
"I'll have to speak with Alwyn,"
Thavias said, eyes bright behind his inquisitive frown.
"Get his notes, his research. This could—"
"No," Grex interrupted, rising slightly on his massive legs, hammer clenched tighter. The metallic plates groaned and shifted with each breath, giving the metal construct a terrifying presence.
"It will be revolutionary,"
Thavias pressed, excitement bubbling despite the pain. "No!" Grex's roar shattered the small market street. Steam hissed from the joints of his suit, and the hammer clanked against his armored thigh. Astegon's eyes widened, tilting his head as he watched his brother's unrestrained reaction, confused by the sudden, almost primal aggression. Thavias instinctively stepped back, a flush of fear creeping into his grin. What do you mean, no?" he asked, voice cautious but still curious, unable to hide the awe that laced his words.
"Glug."
Grex's voice rumbled low as he turned toward Astegon, his massive armored form looming.
"Brother, he dares to reveal what we are. Should we squash him here and now?"
Astegon's eyes flicked toward the young artificer, but he didn't meet his gaze. Calm, precise, almost eerily composed, he spoke in common. "Keep your tone low. Information left in half-formed hands can do more harm than good. We were created to remain hidden, not flaunted. Do not forget that." Grex's slime rippled under the plates of his armor, green liquid sloshing with barely contained agitation. He wanted to argue, to crush the impudent human on the spot, but the logic in Astegon's voice, steady, unwavering, held him at bay. I suppose you're right," Thavias muttered, backing away slowly, the excitement in his eyes dimming. We'll just get our supplies and move along." Grex's gaze swept the crowded market as he walked, each step heavy, resonating through the cobbled street. His slime-like form absorbed the scents and colors of his surroundings, the dust, the faint tang of metal, the sweet aroma of baked goods, but none of it fully reached him. His attention settled on the unfinished flesh golem across the street, standing beside its silent master. Something in Grex's chest, a mixture of curiosity, longing, and an unnameable kinship, pulled him forward. He stopped, towering over the monstrous construct. He studied the golem's stitched body, its lifeless posture. No spark of consciousness, no warmth, nothing. Grex extended a clawed hand, hesitating for the briefest moment before poking the golem's torso. The mass shivered and groaned, a dull, aching sound that sent vibrations up Grex's limbs. It met his gaze, or at least its many eyes did, empty, unfeeling, yet somehow aware of his presence. A strange sense of disappointment crept into Grex's thoughts. Part of him had expected, or perhaps hoped, for some acknowledgement, a nod, a blink, a cry, anything. But the golem remained inert, a hollow echo of life, reminding him of what he himself was not. Grex withdrew his hand, the green slime rippling with a quiet, almost mournful gurgle.
"Does it think?"
Grex asked, his armored form shifting slightly as curiosity and uncertainty coursed through his slime-like body. The black-robed necromancer looked down at him with a scowl.
"What? No! Obviously it doesn't think."
His voice rose, a mixture of incredulity and irritation, nearly spitting as he spoke. Grex tilted his head, the green liquid of his form sloshing quietly.
"Do all constructs not think?"
His question was innocent, born of curiosity rather than challenge, but the necromancer's gaze sharpened, eyes narrowing as though piercing through the empty helm.
"Wait, what? Do you think?"
The necromancer stepped closer, leaning on his cane and peering at what looked like nothing more than a hollow armored shell.
"No."
Grex's reply was blunt, a shield against suspicion, though a faint heat of shame rippled through his body. He didn't like lying, yet he knew silence or a lie was safer. The necromancer jabbed at him with the cane, producing a hollow tink as it struck the armor.
"My master told me to ask questions,"
Grex said, motioning subtly toward Astegon, who walked beside Thavias. The pair was inspecting a construction worker's masonry, observing the enormous slabs of granite the man lugged effortlessly on his back.
"This is marvelous! A talking construct? I must see the man who sculpted such ingenuity!"
The necromancer exclaimed with pride, oblivious to the subtle war of emotions simmering inside Grex. Grex's gaze drifted back to the inert flesh golem, then to the necromancer again.
"Is he a tool?"
His voice carried a muted sadness, buried deep beneath the armored shell, though his coils tightened reflexively, betraying his inner tension. The necromancer nodded, matter of fact.
Yeah, we can't risk defenses being weak going into the infested temple, even if it's just for a meeting of peace with Pope Justin IV. Safety comes first.
Grex absorbed the statement, processing it as he shifted to follow his brother and Thavias as the two of them were leaving. Astegon tossed him a chunk of granite mid-step, and with the fluid motion, the two slimes absorbed the rock into their forms, feeling the weight yet remaining agile. Grex and Astegon shared a tune of gargles and bubbles of happiness as the rock gave them sustenance. Together, the trio left Haven behind, making their way up the snow-dusted paths toward the temple at the mountain's peak, each step carrying anticipation and a quiet, simmering tension for what awaited at the summit. The path out of Haven narrowed quickly, the noise of the town dissolving into wind and the crunch of boots against old snow. Pines leaned inward as though listening, their branches heavy with frost. The air thinned, sharp and clean, each breath biting deeper than the last. Grex walked at the rear, not because he was told to, but because it felt right. He watched Astegon's back as they climbed, the white fur of his armor stirring in the wind, the blue glow of his eyes faint beneath the mask. Thavias trudged ahead of them both, humming softly, unaware of the distance he placed between himself and the two constructs. Every so often, Astegon glanced upward toward the peak, where Alwyn waited alone. Grex did not like that. The mountain felt aware. Loose stones shifted beneath his hoofed boots, but never enough to unbalance him. His armor groaned softly as he moved, the green glow beneath the plates pulsing in slow, thoughtful rhythms. Birds watched from high branches, silent now, as if unsure what he was.
"Brother,"
Grex rumbled quietly, his voice swallowed by the wind.
"Why did Master go ahead without us?"
Astegon didn't stop walking.
"Because if he arrives with us, they see weapons. If he arrives alone, they see a man."
Grex processed that in silence.
"And when we arrive later?"
he asked. Astegon's pace slowed just slightly.
"Then they will already be committed to peace, or already planning violence."
The path steepened. Snow gave way to exposed stone, veined with ice. Far above, the Temple of Sacred Pires came into view, spires of white stone rising from the mountain like spears driven into the sky, banners snapping violently in the wind. Even from this distance, Grex felt it. Wards humming, layered and ancient. Order. His slime churned uncomfortably.
"They won't like us,"
Grex said.
"No," Astegon agreed. "They won't."
Thavias turned back, breathless but smiling.
"Beautiful, isn't it? The temple, I mean. They say the wards can detect intent, hostile magic, undead presence, even cursed artifacts."
Grex's steps faltered for half a heartbeat.
"Then we best keep our intentions clean."
Astegon spoke before Thavias could notice. Grex looked down at his hands, at the hammer he carried, at the way the stone beneath his feet cracked slightly with every step. He remembered the flesh golem's empty eyes, the necromancer's words. Tool. The bells of the temple rang above them, low, resonant, carrying across the peaks. Somewhere at the summit, Alwyn stood alone among paladins and archmages, preparing words meant to end a war. Below, his creations climbed toward him, unseen, unheard, and already judged. Chapter 7. Dangerous Knowledge. Grex and Astegon made steady pace up the mountain, their ascent unbroken and deliberate. Thavias, however, lagged behind, boots dragging, breath hitching, one hand braced against his trembling knee.
"Don't worry," he panted, forcing a smile as he waved them on. "I'll be up there in a minute."
Astegon glanced back, unimpressed, and let out a quiet sigh. Before another word could be spoken, Grex reached down. One massive armored hand closed around the strap of Thavias's pack, and with a single effortless motion, He hoisted the young artificer up onto his left forearm.
"Oh, thank you," Thavias yelped.
Grex said nothing. Time was being wasted. They continued upward without breaking stride. The wind howled louder near the summit, carrying with it the scrape of stone against stone. From behind them came a slow, rhythmic thudding, measured, heavy. Astegon's eyes narrowed. Emerging from the bend in the path was the necromancer from the market, his black robes fluttering as he rode atop his flesh golem like a grotesque camel. The creature's many legs moved in unnatural synchronicity, its stitched body swaying beneath him. The necromancer made sure Grex saw him. Their gazes locked. A mocking chuckle escaped the man's throat as he passed.
"Glug,"
Grex scoffed quietly. Astegon reached out and gave his brother's shoulder a firm, reassuring pat.
"Ignore him."
The stairs to the summit rose before them, wide, ancient steps carved directly into the mountain's spine. As they climbed, voices echoed ahead, just out of view. They reached the top moments too late to witness the necromancer's greeting. Alwyn stood near the entrance, his brow furrowed in open perplexity, as his eyes followed the sight of a young artificer riding one of his creations. The old man said nothing, yet, but the disapproval was unmistakable. Behind him loomed the temple. Ancient yet immaculate, white stone walls gleamed as though newly laid, their cobblestones scrubbed clean of age. Fresh paint adorned the carved reliefs, untouched by weather or time. At every corner rose pristine white spires, sharp and orderly, piercing the sky like declarations of purity. At the heart of the structure stood the entrance, massive marble archways layered one atop another, each etched with deliberate precision. At their apex was the flower symbol, carved so flawlessly it looked less like stone and more like something grown. Grex carefully set Thavias back onto the stone. The moment his boots touched the ground, the young artificer's exhaustion seemed to evaporate. His labored breathing steadied, his posture straightened, and his eyes lit with unmistakable awe as he hurried forward.
"Are you Master Alwyn?"
Thavias nearly shouted, thrusting his hand out eagerly for a handshake. Alwyn did not move. His hands remained buried in his robe pockets as his gaze flicked from Thavias to Grex, then to Astegon. His jaw tightened.
"Of course you brought this nuisance, tool,"
Alwyn muttered, the words edged with irritation. A deep sigh escaped him before he looked back at the young man.
"Yes, it is I, Alwyn, and we have an important meeting to attend, one that does not allow for delays."
The chill in his voice was unmistakable. Astegon inclined his head at once and stepped to Alwyn's right, falling into place without question. Thavias slowly lowered his outstretched hand. His excitement faltered, replaced by quiet confusion as he murmured under his breath, struggling to reconcile the man before him with the legend he had idolized. Grex said nothing. He turned and followed as Alwyn moved toward the temple doors, the green slime within his armor swirling restlessly with each step. Thavias fell in behind him, close but not quite part of the formation. Grex marched on, absorbing the weight of it all as the white stone entrance loomed ahead. The four entered the temple together, stepping into a vast vestibule already mostly filled with quiet motion. Mages stood derobing along the walls, hanging coats, cloaks, and travel-worn jackets on long iron racks. The air smelled faintly of incense and polished stone. Paladins guarded each entrance with watchful care. Their golden-white plate gleamed beneath the temple lights, yet their expressions were warm, welcoming rather than severe. They looked less like soldiers prepared for battle and more like missionaries tasked with shepherding the faithful. Alwyn and his creations required no such preparations. While Astegon followed his master onward, Grex lingered behind, standing sentinel as Thavias awkwardly wrestled his pack from his shoulders. The young artificer fumbled with hooks and straps, muttering under his breath, before finally managing to hang both his belongings and his long brown trench coat. Once finished, Thavias and Grex hurried to catch up. Beyond the vestibule, the main hallway opened wide, its walls lined with towering murals, saints crowned in radiance, paladins standing against shadow, and mages shaping the heavens themselves. Each scene rendered in gold leaf and deep, vibrant dyes that shimmered under hanging crystal lanterns. The corridor spilled into the amphitheater. The chamber descended in gentle tiers, carved directly into the stone like a colossal bowl. Rows upon rows of red and white velvet chairs curved inward, forming perfect arcs that focused the eye and the ear toward the center below. Every seat, no matter how far back, faced the same focal point, as though the room itself demanded attention and obedience. At the heart of the amphitheater rose a raised wooden stage, polished smooth by generations of use. Anchoring it stood a podium carved into the likeness of the sacred flower, its petals flared outward in a gesture both welcoming and commanding. Set within each petal were crystal spheres, softly humming with trapped lightning and pinpricks of distant starlight, arcane energy restrained by holy geometry. Above, the ceiling vaulted high, lost in shadow, allowing voices spoken at the podium to carry unnaturally far, amplified by subtle enchantments woven into the stone. Faith and magic did not merely coexist here, they were engineered to speak as one. But unlike the unified symbolism of the podium, the amphitheater itself felt split down the middle. Mage and paladin occupied opposite halves of the chamber, an invisible line cleaving the room in two. Robes of deep blues, reds, and blacks gathered to the left, murmuring in restrained tones, while polished white and gold plate filled the right, paladins seated in rigid rows, with hands folded and helms removed. No one crossed the divide. Alwyn chose the far left edge of the mage's side, positioning himself as distant from the paladins as the stone allowed. Astegon stood at his shoulder, unmoving. Grex loomed just behind them, Thavias awkwardly wedged at the edge, like he wasn't quite sure he belonged anywhere at all. A hush settled as the hall waited for Pope Justin IV to arrive. Alwyn's fingers tapped slowly against his bicep, once, twice, again, each measured strike betraying his impatience. Astegon mirrored the motion unconsciously, a learned habit, while Grex simply breathed. His armor rose and fell with a wet mechanical rhythm, steam fogging faintly in the cooler air. Unease crept through the chamber like a low draft, but the two slimes felt only one thing clearly, their master. Alwyn's eyes never left the paladins. His jaw was relaxed, his hands steady, but Grex knew that stillness. It was the quiet that came before violence. Astegon knew it too, knew the thought gnawing behind the old man's calm. Not justice, vengeance. Whoosh! A sudden gust cut through the amphitheater, subtle as passing wind, yet heavy with the stench of bile and old blood. Alwyn's nose twitched before the sound even finished echoing. From the aisle below, a familiar figure approached. The necromancer from the marketplace strolled forward at an unhurried pace, his black robes whispering against the stone. A grin tugged at his lips as his eyes locked onto Alwyn, not with fear, but with recognition, with rivalry, like one craftsman acknowledging another. "So," the necromancer drawled, tilting his head, "Alwyn, is that really you, old man? Tell me, what finally dragged you away from your precious work?" Valian didn't wait for an answer. He stepped closer, close enough to reach out and rap his cane against Grex's armored chest. Tap. The sound rang hollow and wet. Inside, the green slime churned, a low gurgle of agitation rippling through the plates. "Tell me about this one specifically." Astegon flinched, his hand twitching as if to speak or draw steel, but his lips remained sealed. Alwyn only rolled his eyes, slow and deliberate, before clearing his throat. His voice was even, controlled. "If you would, Master Valian, I would rather not discuss my private projects. All will be made known when I release my work properly, published, reviewed,
and inked for the public eye."
His gaze flicked briefly to the necromancer's robes.
"As you well know, assuming, of course, your scribbles on morbid flesh ever reach that standard."
Valian's grin thinned. He folded his arms, and at the silent cue, his flesh golem lumbered closer, looming behind him like a grotesque shadow. Grex turned slightly toward it, uneasy, the memory of its dull eyes still fresh. Astegon noticed immediately. He shifted closer to his brother without breaking his stance.
"I see you've taught your toys to speak," Valian continued, circling just enough to make Grex's armor creak. "This one was asking me questions back in Haven."
He tapped Grex's chest plate, again with the cane. Tap.
"Curious little thing."
Grex's grip tightened around his hammer.
"I don't understand why you'd be so cowardly about it," Valian pressed. "This discovery could change everything, a whole new world, thinking constructs, obedient minds."
His eyes gleamed.
"Or perhaps you don't even realize what you're hiding."
Alwyn's breath drew sharp. His mouth opened, and before a single word could escape, Thavias stepped forward. He planted himself between Alwyn and the necromancer, back stiff, hands raised in a nervous but deliberate gesture.
"I agree completely, but he just—"
Grex moved first. In a single fluid motion, he clamped a heavy gauntlet over Thavias's mouth. The young artificer's protest dissolved into a muffled, panicked hum. Alwyn's glare snapped to Grex like a blade.
"Get rid of him, now!"
The words were quiet, final. A flick of Alwyn's fingers dismissed them both. Grex didn't hesitate. He turned, shielding Thavias with his bulk, as he half-dragged, half-shuffled the stunned artificer back toward the archway they had entered through. Thavias's heels scraped against the stone as the amphitheater swallowed the sound of his confusion. Alwyn exhaled through his nose and pinched the bridge of it, as though staving off a headache.
"Yes, that one."
He snapped his fingers once, sharply, and lowered his hand.
"You might think that construct is significant."
His gaze slid sideways.
"But look at this one."
Astegon felt the weight of the room settle on him, before Alwyn even finished the gesture. He stepped forward at his master's command, posture straight, mask unmoving.
"This one is special,"
Alwyn continued, his voice gaining a dangerous warmth.
"If there were any project I would speak of before the ink dries, it would be Astegon."
Behind the mask, the blue slime smiled, small, private, unseen. Pride flickered through him, unwelcome but undeniable.
"He understands," Alwyn said. "Forms, intention, adaptation. No armor required to keep him upright, no crude scaffolding."
His eyes flicked briefly to where Grex had stood.
"Efficient, quick. A soldier who can think, plan, outmaneuver the greatest strategists fielded by any standing army."
Valian's expression sharpened.
"And that," Alwyn went on, his tone dropping, "is what we will need, if today does not unfold the way Justin believes it will."
The old artificer's gaze drifted across the amphitheater, lingering on a paladin standing apart, gold and white plate damp with sweat, gauntleted hands resting uneasily near blades and maces.
"The mages will not remain on the losing side forever," Alwyn said calmly. "Not when my work is ready for mass construction."